So welcome to this webinar with the Swedish Australian Chamber of Commerce. For you who don't know the Swedish Chamber, I just wanted to just briefly go through what we offer and also some of our upcoming events. So I'm just going to share my screen here. So what we do, we provide a platform to network with other organizations and individuals with Swedish Australian business interests to stay informed about the latest trends, to make connections, exchange ideas, and to find synergies, business partners, and like-minded people. So we have a chapter in Sydney and Melbourne, Perth, and recently joined in Brisbane as well. We have over 120 corporate and professional members. And we are the largest and most established Swedish Australian business network in Australia since 1911. We work very closely with the Embassy of Sweden, Business Consulates, Business Sweden, and that's under the Team Sweden umbrella. And we collaborate, of course, also with all the Nordic and other international chambers, the European and Australian Business Council, and Swedish Chambers International. We started recently a cooperation also with all the Swedish chambers in Asia Pacific, which has been really successful for us. And we also work together with the Australian Business Council of Sweden based in Stockholm. So we share events with them as well. And we have just recently changed our way of how we work, as many other organizations has done now due to the crisis. So we're going online with all our events and webinars. And here are just a little selection of our upcoming webinars. We have one on the 5th of May, which is going to be focused on how to adapt, pivot, and rebuild. And that is a second webinar within the subject of COVID-19 impact on business and trade. On the 7th of May, we're handing over to our chapter in Western Australia, Perth, and they will run a Teams quiz, which will be a more an interactive and social event, about 45 minutes. And then we have 14th of May, when we're going to focus on the importance of payment in the time of crisis. 5th of June, we're doing another more social event, and that's going to be with a Swedish National Day theme, because it's the day before. And then we also have one on the 11th of June, which is the third in our series of the impact on business and trade. And that's going to focus on the future, new business climate, new services, and the impact and learnings from what we have gone through so far. You can find all information about all our events on our website. Follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and other updates and information via email. So that's a little bit about us. I'll stop sharing that. With the seminar now, we have a question and answer session. We're going to run that towards the end of the webinar, and it will be run in the chat. So please write your questions in the chat, not in the Q&A possibility. And then you can raise your hands, and we can also answer your questions live. And questions we don't have time to go through, we will try and follow up after the webinar. There is also a survey about the webinar, which will come up as an option for you to take part in. And that will be very valuable for us. It's questions about how this webinar was and how we can improve in the future. Right, now I would like to hand over to Rick Jans from our Melbourne chapter, who will be moderating this session. Welcome, Rick.
Thanks, Camilla. Hi, everyone. I'd like to start by introducing our panelists. So we have Emma Walsh, who's a HR and career coaching social entrepreneur. She set up Parents at Work in 2007 to support not only mums and dads, but also organisations to better manage the challenges of juggling work and family life. And if you think about what's happening now with the global pandemic, that's become really critical. Parents at Work has helped thousands of working mums and dads and their families navigate their career, parenting, and well-being. Welcome, Emma. And
thanks very much.
How fluky is that to actually have two Emmas So Emma Crichton is the Executive Director at People Plus. She grew up in Warrnambool, in regional Victoria. People that are not in Victoria who wouldn't know about Warrnambool, that's along the Great Ocean Road, and it's a really beautiful little country town. She's worked at some of the world's finest restaurants as well prior to her People Plus career, and winning the Employment Services Sector Top Award. And People Plus is a leading employment support and training services company, helping people to transform their lives and businesses through work and training. And having worked with the NDIA about 12 months ago, it's great to see that People Plus have a program for disability employment services. And then we have Michael Kim, who's Spotify's head of HR for JPAC, which is APAC and Japan. And Michael's been there almost 5 years, originating from the great city of New York. And I think we can all say how heartbreaking it's been to see the devastation from COVID-19 in New York. It's just absolutely been horrible. But now he's working for he's an American working for a Swedish company in Australia, responsible for the APAC region. So if that's not global, I'm not too sure what is. And if any of participants has managed to see Michael's LinkedIn profile, he's shaking hands with someone that possibly could be the new president of the United States at the end of the year.
We hope.
Welcome everyone. So we'll probably, since we're on to Michael, we'll probably start with Michael. And I think everyone on the call probably has a playlist with Spotify. They've managed to disrupt the whole music industry. Daniel Ek, who was the founder, who's living in Stockholm. I lived in Sweden for a few years, and I lived in a country town called Borås, which is kind of like a Geelong. It's about a 50-minute drive from Gothenburg. And Daniel Ek was born in Borås. So I think people from Borås are pretty chuffed that H&M started there, but actually Daniel Ek's from Borås. So I can probably start with you, Michael, in terms of what are you doing internally to support your staff manage their mental health and well-being?
Yeah, and before I start, thank you guys for the invitation. It's a pleasure being here, and you know, my thoughts and prayers go out to everyone who's been impacted by COVID in this horrible pandemic. And it's been a really difficult time for us, as it is for everybody else around the world. And it's unprecedented in the sense where there was no playbook on this, especially from an HR perspective on how to approach a pandemic like this, other than being extremely reactive. So for us, our COVID journey started back in early January, first from our Singapore office, as the virus left Wuhan and spread into Singapore, and then of course the cruise ship that was docked in Japan. So those were our two offices that were first impacted by this in early January. And you know, what we have at Spotify is something called a crisis management team that I lead for JPAC as well. That's led by my boss, Katarina, who's a CHRO for Spotify. And when we sat together as a crisis management team to figure out how we're going to deal with, at that time, the epidemic of COVID, we first put together an agreement that any decision we make here has to be anchored off of one very important philosophy. And that is that the safety of our people come first. And every decision we make needs to align with that value. And then the other thing that we agreed upon was leaning on our culture and value, to our values as a company, to get us through this epidemic and now pandemic. So what did we do? Back in early January, I'd say the second week of January, we sent out an email to all staff within Singapore and Japan at that time, because no other countries were really impacted by it, basically stating exactly what our philosophy was, that safety comes first, but we gave everyone the autonomy and the option and the right to work from home and not travel if they chose that they did not want to. So again, it's not rocket science or anything disruptive or groundbreaking here, but it goes back again to the importance of communication, trust, autonomy, and really letting our people make their choice for themselves on how they feel safe coming into the office or not. And we wanted to create that environment where they had the power, they had the ownership to make that decision, on top of course, the governmental guidance from the ministries of health and the public health organizations that were mandating either lockdowns and quarantines. Of course, we complied with that as well. So really building that culture of trust and autonomy, even in little things like saying, during this time frame, everyone, you do not need your manager's approval to work from home. You do not need your manager's approval to not travel or go to that business meeting that you deem to be non-essential. We gave that power over to our employees very, very early on and let them lead and manage their own safety from there while we support them. The other thing that we've done, I think that's super, super effective and super impactful based on the feedback so far from all of our people, is we've over-communicated during this time. We leverage platforms not only via email, but also platforms like Workplace, or whatever medium other companies use to connect with their employees through the intranet. And we gave them weekly updates. We gave them daily updates. And something that's very powerful that was really received well was also acknowledging and admitting that we don't know all the answers as well, and we'll get back to them. But I think it created a sense of trust and a sense of unity when we over communicate, and also a culture of safety, an environment of safety, and making people feel like, hey, we have your back, right? You know, we were open and we were vulnerable. We spoke about really uncomfortable topics between myself, Katerina, Daniel, sending out emails and having one-on-ones around topics around bereavement and death and grieving and depression and mourning and isolation. And we recognize that vulnerability is not a weakness, it's a strength. And I think our people really, really resonated with that. So not only over communicate, obviously, what's happening in the media and what's going on with our people there, but also talk to your people like a human being. Acknowledge that, yeah, you know, head of HR for JPEG, I'm also very scared of what's going on here. I also have a family. Here's how I'm dealing with it. So communication has been, I think, our key success here. And it's not rocket science, but a lot of companies are not doing that right today from what we've heard and other feedback. You know, from a CEO perspective, even Daniel usually does an all hands once a quarter. He now started doing it every week, given the fact that everyone's working from home, understanding the need to stay connected with our people whilst we're not able to work with them. We addressed parents throughout this pandemic and acknowledged the difficulties around working from home, especially as school lockdowns happen and kids are at home. And, you know, it's funny, I read a lot of articles lately around best tips of setting up a home office. Make sure there's a quiet space, make sure you have this, make sure you have that. I think we took the opposite approach, where we sent out emails and communicated and over communicated with our people saying, hey, listen, this is an unprecedented time, get used to it. It's okay if your kids are screaming in the background. It's okay if your kids are climbing over you, or pets are in the background, or your partners or roommates are in the background. You know, that's something we need to accept and adapt to, but it's okay for you to work in that environment. So we embrace that instead of forcing people into quiet areas, or people feeling like they have to shut off their cameras or mute themselves, because that takes away from the collaboration, that takes away from the creativity, and we wanted to limit that as much as possible. We also strongly encouraged our people to remind them that you still have PTO and vacation days. Take it. If this is overwhelming, take that break you need. We have a tremendous heart and soul team that's focused on well-being for our people. So we've offered virtual meditation, Headspace subscriptions. But the most important thing through this crisis that we offered as an employer to our people was the autonomy and empowerment for them to control their schedule, them to control their time, them to control how they want to work and how comfortable they feel working in the environment they're working in, and that we as an employer will support them 100%, right? And I think just communicating that to our people alleviated a huge sense of stress and anxiety on how we adapt into this remote working environment. And then of course we've had fun. You know, everything from pet conferences, conference calls, to virtual DJ sessions being held by teams. Daniel and the leadership team started a lemon challenge online where they challenge everyone to eat 2 lemons and in under a certain amount of time. So that was exciting and kind of fun. But we're doing this all virtually now. And we also have an amazing PX team, a people experience team, who's really stepped up from their job of organizing and creating an experience in the office, whether that be through ficas or that be through offsites and team gatherings, to overnight shifting, how do we create a people experience virtually, right? And they've done a tremendous job of switching that experience virtually so that we still stay connected to our company culture. And then of course, there are more tactical things that we've done throughout this process, like provide everyone with a minimum or maximum, office supply spend. We understand that your home is not your office, and there are some things that you need there, whether it's an ergonomic chair or a desk or a printer or a shredder. So we quickly worked with finance to create a budget and allow our people to expense that as we are forced into quarantine and lockdowns. We worked very closely with our facilities teams to make sure that our offices are deep cleaned and kept clean, so that when our people come back into the office, we mitigate the amount of transmission and spread as much as possible. But again, you know, we've done so much more, but at the end of the day, what's getting us through this pandemic, and ironically, people have joked about this because they're like, some of our people are actually saying, coronavirus has actually created a stronger culture and bond amongst us. And I think part of that reason is because in times of crisis, people come together and they unite, right? That's number one. But two is the way we communicated and over communicated to our people, instead of keeping people in the dark, has proven to be the most effective strategy to try to keep our people safe, try to keep our people calm, and try to keep them as much of a business as usual strategy as possible. So my advice to everyone here on the call for your people is just over communicate. It's just constantly let your people know that you're looking out for them, you're thinking about them, and this is what we're working on to keep them as safe as possible. And you know, I think that mitigates a lot of fear and anxiety, and I think that's proven well for us at Spotify.
Fantastic, thanks. There's heaps there for people to digest. But I agree in terms of the over communication in times like this. You don't want to be having a lack of communication. So I think Emma Walsh, since we've got to say your full name, since we have
thanks, Rick.
I think you've got some slides that you can present. So
yeah,
the first question would be, what are the main challenges that you see that we're all facing?
Yeah. Thanks, Rick. And I'd like to also acknowledge Michael and the work that Spotify are doing. It is unprecedented, and it's devastating what's happened around the world. And I am really aware just how much suffering families are going through at the moment. And of course, parents at work, that's what we're about, supporting families. And, it's been really, very challenging time for our own business around, having to really readjust to, okay, we know that there are so many families in need right now. What are we going to do to support them? Because really, if we can't rise now as a business and be there for families across the world, and in particular, obviously, companies that are members of Parents at Work, then why do we exist? This is our opportunity to really do whatever we can to support families. And that meant really having to think about what were our own challenges as individuals within our business. And I've thrown these up on the screen here because most of these challenges perhaps wouldn't be new for those of you that have families and are working, or identify that with other people that you work with. It's just that what's particularly difficult and unprecedented at the moment is that all of these things are happening at once. Normally there'd be 2 or 3 of these that would be keeping us busy, and parents are used to juggling. But if you throw all of these kind of challenges at them at once, it's incredibly overwhelming. And I agree that a lot of businesses are really thinking about staff with families and how they're going to support them. And I think it's just worth noting that for many families, they really have lost and are missing their social hood. And what I mean by social hood is that sense of connection with obviously their colleagues, their work, their support networks, their friends, their extended family that they can't be in touch with right now. And that's incredibly difficult when, most families set up a support network, right, and system by which they operate. And if you rip that away, then suddenly it all becomes very fragile. And so the ability for those families to be thinking and operating effectively, it's difficult. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that for most of us, whether you've got children or not, we all belong to families who rely on us and need us. We're all part of a family. And so these kind of challenges, need to be acknowledged by employers in particular, and one another, so that we can really understand and have some empathy for what's going on. And I know, I certainly have found it really difficult. And supposedly I'm supposed to be an expert at juggling work and family. But I know that added pressure in particular of homeschooling and trying to run a business, and look after a team of people and, look after all of the parents that of thousands of parents that we support, is really difficult. So it's just, as I said, worth acknowledging that these are the kind of challenges that people are facing. And the particular challenge for employers and for all of us is we don't know when this is going to be over, and when we get to the other side of this, what it's going to look like. And what kind of flexibility will be needed. And so these kind of questions we're all asking every single day, and at the same time, many of us are worried about keeping our jobs. So I think these kind of challenges hitting all at once are unique, and it requires a unique response as we think about it as a community. Since this webinar is also about working from home, I thought I'd share some of the challenges with that, and also some of the opportunities, because Parents at Work we do have an office, but largely we work from home, or we work on site with clients. We have permanent people that work permanently from home. And so we've got lots of practice at this, but we also acknowledge that if you add COVID into this, there are even more challenges than there has been in the past, as Michael was alluding to. We're just not set up for it at home. Our internet isn't very good. We're adding in the homeschooling. It's really challenging. And I'm sharing with you on the slide now the State of Remote report that was done last year before COVID entered our worlds. And you could already see that there are challenges with remote working. And you now layer that with the COVID-19 pieces, and it becomes even more difficult, because as you can see in that State of Remote report, there's nothing about children and homeschooling on that, because we weren't doing that. So now we know that it's not as easy as it sounds to just send people home and work. Having
It'd
said,
be interesting to see the stats. Like, if you think finding reliable Wi-Fi, or the congestion now with everyone working from home, staying motivated at home from pets or kids, the dramatic change in those stats from 1 year because of COVID will be really interesting to see next sometime this year.
It will, won't it? And now I'm going to flip to the positives, because of course there are so many benefits coming from remote working as well. And I'd really like to see these rise. And you can see I've, added actually more positives than negatives here. Obviously, I don't know about other people listening in, but I think there are certainly some brilliant efficiencies that can be made from working from home. It's a little bit like the homeschooling. If you talk to experienced homeschool people, they'll say to you, really, kids only need a couple of hours when getting some one-on-one home teaching. They don't need the full 6 or 7-hour school day. So I think the same certainly goes for work. If we've got some focused time without any distractions and any commute time and any of the things that, can be, frankly, a real disruptor at work, we've certainly got that time back. And I think there's lots of people thinking, their ability to really get out and exercise a little bit more, have a walk in the morning when they were otherwise commuting. I've certainly seen a lot more of that in my neighbourhood. And then the ability to get on and do a solid hour or two without any disruptions, and then come back onto work and I'll come back into the family life and do something, certainly has its benefits.
Yeah, that's a huge plus, I think. I know when I used to just walk my dogs, there'd be other people, just a single person walking the dog. But now you've got kids on scooters and bikes and the whole family, husband, wife, and it's fantastic. It's like going back 30, 40 years where there was more family togetherness before the iPads and the streaming and everything else. And now, because of people being locked up at home, they're actually getting out and about as a family unit, which is really fabulous to see.
Yes, and I think you start to really appreciate the back to basics things, right? I mean, I'm looking at my wardrobe. I don't know if anyone else is doing that, thinking, I don't need all these clothes. Surely it's time to donate. Look, there are just lots and lots of benefits, and I'd really like to see these benefits manifest more permanently after this crisis is over, because I think we've got some really great progressive companies like Spotify. They're really supportive of flexible work, but we certainly know that there's been some organisations that have held back from allowing people to work more freely from home or more irregular hours. And I think we're going to be challenged by that. We can't, suggest that today we'll send everyone home and expect them to work, and then in 6 months' time, when people are working back in the office more frequently, no, you're not allowed to work from home. So there's certainly going to be some significant, changes, I think, in terms of the way that people work in the future. So there's a little bit about, the balance of the positives and the negatives, but I certainly think there's more positives from remote working if we can get it right. And Michael's right too, communication is key. You asked also, Rick, about why does it matter that employers connect with their people during a crisis? And I think Michael's just touched on that so beautifully around it talks to the heart of the values of that particular organisation. Parents at Work did an inaugural survey around working families at the end of last year, and we surveyed over 6,000 families to ask them how they were managing work and family. So this is pre-COVID, and the feedback that they gave us is that they weren't managing very well. 62% of them said they really struggled with their own personal health and well-being, that 1 in 4 were thinking about leaving their current employer because of the conflict, that managers generally hadn't been as comfortable talking to managers about their needs, and the flexibility still wasn't where it needed to be for them. So this was before the crisis. So I think, wow, gosh, can you imagine how people's mental health and well-being is right now? The stress and the anxiety that this has caused. So we know that people are not feeling okay, and it's really important that employers recognise that this was a problem before COVID and it's actually increased as an issue, and that all organisations must have some kind of response around how people are, going to be supported to manage work and home life. They need a plan for how this is going to work, because otherwise you can have some really, challenged people at the end of this. They're going to be quite traumatised and distressed with their own ability to perform in the way that you need them to. I'll go into this now because I'm conscious I want to give Emma a chance to have a chat too, but I thought I'd sum up. You asked me to sum up a few points on how employers can help. Michael's given some good ones. Here's my top 5. I do think for those of you that have got bigger businesses, that you've got leaders that are now having to manage remote teams, don't assume that they know what they're doing with that and that they're okay. I think it's incredibly difficult not only to manage your own self and performance and look after your family if that's what you've got in your home, but then to be worried and managing everybody else that works in your team. And the shoulder of responsibility for that's enormous. And, you know, leaders need recognition that that is hard and they need help with that. I think it is incredibly important to be checking in on people's emotional and financial well-being. You know, there's people, if you don't know your people, now's the time to know your people, because the likelihood of financial stress that your people will be going under will be enormous. You know, they might be with partners that have lost their jobs. They might be really struggling. You need to know that to know how to respond and support them adequately. And that does look like getting them the support that they need. And if you can't provide that as an employer, knowing whether they can go and get that externally, because there's certainly some, you know, free support services that exist within the community to help people with their physical and mental well-being. I do think we need to be really careful about managing the amount of meetings and calls we're doing. I have seen that just rise exponentially, and I don't know about anyone else, but I do feel here we are again on a Zoom call, and there's just so many of them, and we need to probably wind that back a bit so that people have the chance to just think and get on with what they need to do. And the last one around being real and encouraging and acknowledging that employees are doing the best they can. This is the moment to have that, you know, real, authentic conversation with people around just how they're going, and be encouraging and do what you can. And I recognise that, you know, every business has its limitations about what it can do. But even we're only a small business. We have 6 permanent people and a wider contractual staff. But in our certain little team of 6, you know, I've really thought about this, that, you know, if I want to practice what I'm preaching here. And for our business, we've done things like we've given $100 towards health and wellness a month to every employee to redeem on what they think will make a difference. We've done the same thing around, please let us know what you need at home to make sure we'll get you the desk or the chair or whatever that might be. We've created a buddy system between the 6 of us to make sure that someone's got somebody else's back if they get sick, and they're just checking in on each other every couple of days. You know, little things like that can make a big difference. So setting up that kind of system, I think, works. And again, on a personal level, if you don't have 1 or 2 people that you have reached out to yet on a regular basis, then I think it's great if you can do that, because chances are they need you just as much as you need them. So to have some key people to talk to, I think is important for our own mental health and wellbeing. So back to you, Rick.
Thanks, Emma. And now on to the other Emma. And we'll be covering more around for the people that are looking for jobs and job seekers. So you've got some slides as well.
I do. Let me get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm slightly disappointed. I'd organised a background shot of, oh, come on, that's not working for me. Sorry, just getting my slideshow working, which I've tested a number of times.
And it worked in test phase.
I know. I'll just stop sharing for 1 second. I did have a nice background shot of the old town in Stockholm, in case anyone was feeling homesick for us all today, but unfortunately my green screen hasn't worked. I don't know what's going on here. Sorry, everybody. Just while I'm starting to get my presentation, I'm about to put up a slide of our company and show you the dramatic change that we've had as a company that was previous to COVID 100% a customer-facing organisation. I'm now really frustrated, sorry. And we have had a large amount of our revenue dry up as a direct result of COVID-19.
Emma, I have your slideshow as well. You sent it. So do you need to share it, see if it works?
Camilla, that would be so fantastic. Thank you. Sorry for that.
So the first question, as those slides come up, is that you work with 12,000 job seekers at present.
Well, in this snapshot that Camilla's about to put up when we get that slideshow playing from the beginning, this was 4 weeks ago. we had over 13,500 job seekers. So every box in this infographic has been dramatically impacted as a result of this pandemic. The first box with getting 400 jobs per month, that's been reduced by 75% due to a number of different restrictions and rules that the government have for job seekers, but also as a direct result of the labour market conditions. Those 8,000 customers, we were seeing all of them face to face. We're now having to work out how to see them all via phone or video conferencing. Those 70 training rooms have all had to move either online or video conferencing, or in some cases we're even doing old school postal service to train and educate job seekers. And those 150 plus locations around Australia, oh God, have been dramatically reduced as well.
Let's move on.
I'm still there?
Yeah.
Yes. So those 150 plus locations around Australia, that's only 10 sites now that still have the electricity on. And they're just sites where people weren't able to still do from home some of the administration duties that are required. And there's skeleton staff in those sites to allow for appropriate social distancing. So that's a big shift that we've had to deal with in 4 weeks, basically. So yeah, next slide. Thank you, Camilla.
It actually doesn't work for me to move either. Maybe something with the PowerPoint. Let me just move on to the next one, yeah?
Okay. Oh, it's so work testing. That's our pandemic of my PowerPoint. Yes. So with, we're about to put up a slide. So there's sort of 3 categories of conversation for me. How are we dealing with now the unemployed people that we can no longer service from a face-to-face capacity? They're all feeling more and more vulnerable now that they can't come in and see us on site. And they're also further feeling more vulnerable because of the large amount of uncertainty in the labour market and competition to get a job. So we apply a strength-based approach, which is formed from behavioural economics. It's fundamental that we do this and improve the strengths of our job seekers. We're grappling with things about what time of the day do we communicate with them. So one simple thing we're doing is sending an SMS saying, "Are you okay?" And when we get a response to that SMS, that indicates to us that's a good time for us to give that job seeker a call. And then there's the other things that I'm sure you're all experiencing in Zooms or phone calls where you're missing a lot of the prompts that you would normally have in a face-to-face environment. So how do you deal with the silences when you're servicing a job seeker? So we're doing things like making sure you're answering or saying yes, or even just going, or repeating what they said to you and checking if that makes sense to them. But the biggest thing to do is kindness at the moment. Kindness, and when you use a strengths approach, it actually reduces a very powerful chemical called dopamine, which is a feel-good chemical. And if we can produce as much dopamine with our job seekers as possible, they're going to be more motivated to work on their goals. And then, you know, the better they feel about themselves, they're going to work hard and hopefully be able to achieve their goals. Next slide. So changes.
Is that okay, Size, by the way? I'd leave it there because otherwise it doesn't work to move.
That's fine, Camilla.
Yeah.
So as a result of the effect, you know, we've had to make some really tough decisions, and we've had to do that, you know, to be sure that we're being responsible to the long-term economy of our company, and for everyone, because all we want to do is bring everyone back to a working environment. So we've had to pivot to manage our business in a lockdown economy. There's that balance between racing so fast to keep up with this pace of change that we're experiencing, alongside making sure we readjust, reset, and not burn out. And I think probably most of you are going through that same thing. But the key to it is, you know, what can we control and what can't we? We don't know when this will end, but we can control a positive attitude and a determination to get through this as best as possible. Next one. So like at Spotify, our CEO is accessible and communicating regularly with all staff. He's doing all company addresses at a very frequent pace with staff that have had to be stood down and staff that are also still working from home. We're using a lot more virtual interaction and having a few games there. We're going to use humour. Humour is important in a strengths approach because it does broaden and build, and looking at, you know, entertainers are out of work at the moment. They're big casualties of this pandemic. So bringing on and paying a comedian for a 30-minute set over Zoom won't just make people laugh, but will also feel a little bit better about providing some work for people that are doing it really tough. And I suppose also, you know, the cloud, you know, more reliance on it. I think maybe not so much at Spotify where you probably work in the cloud as the norm, but, you know, a lot of people you work with can pay lip service to the cloud, and they really find the information out when they're in the office, sitting amongst colleagues or at the lunchroom. But when we're in the pandemic, you can't. You have to be on the cloud and you have to collaborate on there, and that's making people more technically savvy and working better in cross-divisional teams. And I like the thing about the cross-divisional teams at the moment as well, because even though it's the things that we're trying, it's not really new. Often humans just retreat back to their tribes and their comfort zones when you're in the office. But when you're on the cloud and when you're in a pandemic, we're less likely, and we're not retreating. We're sort of finding great new efficiencies, innovations, and better practice working with people that we don't normally work with across different parts of our business. So I sort of did that little quote. We're realizing what we need to do now, we probably needed to do before.
Yeah.
And then just the broader macro labour market. I think you probably all read the news and seen the headlines that Australians looking for work more than doubled in the second half of March, both for full-time and part-time employment. But there's also many large employers like Wesfarmers with supermarkets and Spotless with cleaning contracts who are booming, but they're having serious recruitment issues, and they have commonly automated recruitment processes. And then you've got all these unemployed people that need to use a lot of creativity to get through those automated processes. And I have heard two nice creative examples that I can share with you if you like, but one was a pilot. He couldn't find work, no likelihood of getting work in his industry, was applying through the robots to try and get work in logistics and supermarkets, and then couldn't get through. And obviously he's not got the experience that a supermarket's looking for. So he made a little one-page document on himself where he had a photo of him in his pilot outfit at work, and then he made another one of him stacking shelves in his pantry in casual clothes, and then did a little pitch on what are his transferable skills and how being an airline pilot would be a great asset to a supermarket. That's a good one I liked. And then there's another one I heard in the UK about a lady who had been an executive or is an executive in the travel industry, and she was complaining to one of her friends about not being able to get a job in a supermarket. And her friend said, "Oh, you're a clown if you think you've got the skills that meet the employer's needs." So this lady had a bit of a toss and turn for a few days, and then she decided that she might dress up as a clown and go to the supermarket herself and see if they'd employ her. So she put on the makeup and the clown outfit and the fuzzy face, and she walked around, and when she finally found the floor manager, she'd gained a lot of attention by then, and she sort of expressed, this is the lengths I'd go to demonstrate what an asset I would be to this supermarket. And that's just another little cute example that I've heard about job seeking in this current pandemic. Yeah. And then my final point about being creative and innovative in our own company is a fine balance with fiscal responsibility. And I'm sure that everybody is experiencing the challenges of that. Like, you have to innovate and you have to be creative right now, but never has there been more of a time to be financially responsible about your forecasting and your costs, because it's a friction that we're experiencing. I'm sure it's not unique.
Absolutely. Thanks, Emma. It's a real balancing act to cover health and well-being, financial stability and reporting, and looking at listening to government initiatives and some of their recommendations, and then balancing that with your people. So I think we've got time now to open up to any questions that come through from audience and listening. If no, nothing coming through chat. So I can one for you, Michael, while we're waiting for some questions to come through. Spotify has been kind of the benchmark around agile and new ways of working. ING emulated them, but more famously in Australia, ANZ adopted Spotify's way of working and rearranged their whole bank around agile ways and scrums and teams and everything else. Have you found, because your company was already the leader around agile, that's enabled you to transition to this new way of working easier? And are there any takeaways that companies that have either started down the agile path, or any takeaways that could help them be able to transition, as this probably goes a lot longer than expected?
Yeah, I think we were definitely had an advantage, because we've always been discussing for a while now what the future of work will be look like, and even evolving our own agile working philosophy into what the next generation of that would look like. So we started this work well before COVID happened, but it was certainly, we never expected it to be as disruptive and immediate as COVID. So in that sense, we weren't prepared for it. But like Emma was saying, you know, Spotify, we're lucky to be in one of those industries that doesn't have a direct impact, such as the airline industries and the food industries and the restaurant industries that have seen the brunt of what this pandemic has done. All of our employees have company issued mobile phones. All of our employees have company issued laptops. We don't have landlines. We often work virtually. So the transition, I think, was easier for us than most other companies. But I think the one thing we're struggling with in this is, and what we've always struggled with the future of work is, if we look at a world of remote working, regardless of COVID or not, I think something that we lose here is a human element of just being around each other, which, you know, Emma, you said in your presentation, sparks innovation, sparks creativity. Our philosophy around learning is that 70% of the learning that should be done in the office is just done by overhearing other people's conversations and working together and side by side and learning and listening and observing. We lose that. And then from a leadership perspective, we believe, as one of our baselines of being an effective leader, is you have to be present. So how do you do that in a remote working environment? So these are things that we've been discussing well before COVID. But I think what's interesting, and that what COVID has triggered us to do, is actually take that discussion into a testing environment. So in a very Spotify tech way, we have teams of R&D engineers who are tracking KPIs and seeing, hey, does remote working work? Are we more efficient in this model? What's working and what's not? So we're also taking this opportunity again to learn as well through this pandemic. And the other interesting thing that we've been talking about as well around remote working is this notion of dynamic working, where we look at real estate in a very different way now. So if we have, 100 people in our Singapore office, the old and more traditional way would be to look at and say, okay, well, if we have 100 people, we need to find an office space that fits 100. But now what we're looking at in dynamic working is we're trying to take research, we're trying to take data and show actually what are the movements of our people, right? Because we have 100 people in an office doesn't mean that they're there from 9 to 5 every day. People are traveling, people are out taking external meetings. So instead of a 100-person office, we might actually need a 60-person office. And now remote working comes into dynamic working. Remote work is an extra variable into our dynamic working kind of formula on how we reassess the real estate landscape of how we build offices as we continue to expand globally. So COVID has been for us a testing ground on something that we've been discussing for a very long time. But again, what we found from a people perspective is that there are a lot of people that cannot wait to get back into the office, right? At first you think, oh, working from home is great. I get to sit on my couch. I, don't need to wear pants. I could just do my own thing, and my kitchen's right there. That's a novelty that wears off very quickly. So if anything, a lot of our people have been reaching out to us now saying, hey, other than government mandates, once those government mandates are lifted, can we come back into the office? One of our biggest challenges when COVID first started was actually telling our people, stop going into the office, stop going into the office. You're just, contributing to the spread. You got to stay at home. But we recognize and have to address that workforce that actually thrives on coming into the office every day. So we have to be mindful of both, but I think there's going to be a huge postmortem for us after COVID is done to see what worked and what didn't. And then we're going to continue to test our agility model from there, and hopefully share with the wider world kind of our learnings, because there is data being tracked as we speak right now on what works and what doesn't. And it's just going to be a phenomenal kind of project, because I do believe that the world will not look the same when we go back from COVID. The COVID has completely transformed the way we live and work, and there will be an after effect that hopefully we learn from. So it'll be exciting times ahead.
And I think you've kind of answered. Julie Hagan asked a question, do you think working from home will be more of the new normal when the crisis settles? So I guess you've kind of covered that, but Emma, if you have any, we still have a few minutes to answer that in terms of really what is the new normal and working from home, if that becomes the new normal.
I might just say that I've heard similar stories to what Michael's just shared. There's another client of ours that was in the process of looking for new office space. Same thing, has now said, actually, we're not going to need that much. And we now realise that what people are looking for from work is a place to come and collaborate and be together, as opposed to come and do everything that is involved with their job at work. That they recognise now that it's going to be fluid. Work will happen between work and home and other locations, but important to have a hub by which people can come to work and be social with one another. So I agree. I think it will look completely different. I think companies will really reevaluate what they need. And I think rightly so. We've been building towards this future of work for a very long time. COVID's given us a leap forward that we just have to go forward with. I don't think there is any going back. As I said, I think it'd be very difficult for employers to not offer flexibility going forward without a legitimate reason. So I think we will see a lot more fluidity. The only the challenge with that is making sure that we don't continue to really blur the lines between work and home to the point that people struggle to have a separation time, because that's important to not be connected 24/7. We know that that's not good for our mental and physical health. And so I do think that there's going to be this new focus on how we manage work-life integration, which is a good thing. I think we do need to have that conversation much more so than perhaps we have been doing.
Yep. Right. There was
We'll go back. We'll go back. We're getting everything online and e-learning and virtual classrooms and I keep saying in some of our team meetings, if e-learning was going to kill classrooms, it would have done it in the last 20 years while it's been trying to do so, because learning is social and humans are social, and we've got to make sure that when we are delivering virtually to our students and job seekers, that we're blending plenty of interaction and time. It's not much of the labour market works solo. Most of us work in teams. and we need to interact and connect and learn the norms and the soft skills that are required to be successful in teams. So I think it'll probably never go back to same, but I think there'll be a lot of going back when we can, but the social distancing will be around for some time, I'd say.
Yeah. And just following up, Jared Lacey wanted to know if there's been significant change in productivity yet with the new ways has anyone seen a difference from that trend? And
I think what we're seeing is productivity isn't going down. If anything, ironically, productivity is going up in many areas. It's just, what's interesting is that the traditional norm of your 9 to 5 day is changing, right? You no longer have a commute to and from work. You now have kids at home, where it's tremendously more difficult to be productive with a 3-year-old screaming in the background. So what we see happening now are, maybe, for example, parents, they're actually logging on earlier and getting productive there. We're seeing productivity decrease during the afternoon, but then spike up back again in the evening times, perhaps when the kids are down. The issue there is disconnecting and finding that balance. So what we've reminded all of our parents is, hey, if you need to take, for example, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. off, block it off your calendar, shut off your laptop, and be with your family, right? Manage your own time. So this is the greatest challenge for everyone around time management and how to effectively manage your own time and decouple yourself from the traditional corporate norm of my hours of work are 9 to 5 and then I go home, right? I think that's something that COVID has impacted tremendously in today's work environment and productivity. So I thought that was an interesting stat that I saw recently.
yeah. I've got one.
Oh, Rick, you're on.
Yeah, sorry. We've got time for one last question from Andrew Pooch. Hi, Andrew. And hub idea is interesting, but hot desking cannot work in this new environment. How do you balance that?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, well, you'd have to deep clean it between users, wouldn't you? Haven't thought of that one.
Yeah, and I think we started to discuss that as well, because we don't call it hot desking. It's more dynamic working for us in the sense where people have the flexibility to sit where they want to sit and they don't have their own desk in that sense. But of course, COVID changes that. We've been talking a lot with our facilities team. Emma, you're spot on. We have to increase our deep cleaning protocols. But there's other things. I think, Andrew, this is a brilliant question and something that's unanswered yet, but there may be protocols that are coming in now and some that we're discussing is things such as mandatory temperature checking before an employee comes back into the office, right? Which some governments have instituted. We're looking at a model of splitting our workforce into team A, team B, and kind of swapping them in and out to mitigate any second wave spread. But and then social distancing measures, right? These are all things that now we have to reassess given the world of COVID that we live in. And strangely enough, early days, especially when this blew up in Europe and the US, one of the hottest topics early days was around the effectiveness of hand sanitizer in the office. I don't know why it was such a hot topic, but there was this battle between washing hands is more important and more effective than hand sanitizing, or hand sanitizing is more effective there. But it led to questions around how many hand sanitizer stations do we now put in, and things like that. So this has definitely put a spanner in our hot desking or dynamic working strategy, as we need to make it compliant with COVID. Andrew, I think it's a great question. It's a call I have later tonight to discuss with our head of facilities as well, as we prepare to bring people back in to the office when lockdowns are over. But again, social distancing, right? How do we secure that in an office too? So when I know more, I'll share it with you guys. But it's definitely going to be a lot more restrictive. Okay. I think until we get back to a norm, or there's a vaccine where people feel comfortable, more comfortable, with the risk of getting infected. So
okay, and we're right on time, so I'd like to thank everyone: Emma Walsh, Emma Crichton, Michael Clem, Camilla, for all your help in the background. It's been really informative. We could have had another hour going over this, so if anyone has other questions, they can get in touch with SACC, and we'll be happy to follow up with the panelists to get back with any questions that people didn't have time. There's also a feedback survey to get back, but it's been interesting, and it's a topic that we could easily run another session. But thanks everyone.
Thank you.
thank you, everyone.
It's been really,
Thank you.
really interesting for me as well.
Thank you very much, Rick. And yes, as Rick mentioned, there is the feedback survey, and you can also put your questions there in case you didn't have a chance to ask now. But I think we've covered all of them. Thank you very much.
All right.